The UK Corporate Governance Code was published by the Financial Reporting Council in July 2018. The code is supported by the Guidance on Board Effectiveness, also published by the FRC in July 2018. The FRC encourages boards and companies to use this to support their activities. The guidance does not set out the right way to apply the code. It is intended to stimulate thinking on how boards can carry out their role most effectively. The guidance now includes some of the procedural aspects of governance which historically were covered by the code. Such former features of the code are now well established as good practice and compliance levels are high. The guidance is intended to act as a reminder to boards and their support teams that good practice and procedure should continue to be followed. The tools and techniques for board effectiveness suggested in the guidance will assist companies in applying the principles in the code and offer inspiration when it comes to illustrating in the annual report how this has been done. The guidance is supported by a series of questions which can be useful for you generally improving your board performance or when carrying out a formal board performance evaluation and director appraisal. So, an effective board. How does the board know that management is identifying and addressing future challenges and opportunities? For example, changes in technology, environmental issues, or changing stakeholder expectations. What proportion of board time is spent on financial performance management versus other matters of strategic importance? Is the balance between the focus on immediate issues and long-term success appropriate? Is the board playing an active role in shaping long-term investment plans to underpin delivery of strategy and value creation? Is sufficient time allocated to idea generation, opportunity identification, and innovation? Does the board use scenario analysis to help it assess the strategic importance and potential impact of its challenges and opportunities? Is the board securing the benefits of big data to give it a competitive edge? How does the board assess and measure the impact of its decisions on financial performance, the value for shareholders, and the impact on key stakeholders? Do shareholders drive the company to act in a way that is out of line with its purpose, values, and wider responsibilities? How does the board demonstrate ethical leadership and display the behaviours it expects from others? To what extent is the board's way of operating a reflection of the values it is promoting? Is the board clear on what sort of culture is needed to underpin the company's purpose and its long-term success? How does the board articulate and communicate what it considers to be acceptable business practices? What behaviours are being driven when setting strategy and financial targets? How consistent is company strategy, for example on tax and capital allocation, with the board's purpose and values, its responsibilities for long-term success, and to contribute to wider society? How have the values and expected behaviours been reinforced in the company's recruitment, promotion, reward, performance management, and other policies, processes, and practices? Do reward structures produce appropriate incentives that encourage desired behaviours and responsible risk-taking? What steps has management taken to communicate values and expected behaviours widely and clearly across the company? What assurance is there that the Code of Conduct and Ethics training programmes are up to date, adequately communicated and understood by the workforce? What steps has management taken to ensure that suppliers meet expected standards of behaviour? Has management identified appropriate KPIs that are properly aligned to desired outcomes and behaviours? What does the workforce say about the tone from the top and the tone from the middle? What evidence does the board have that the chief executive is willing to listen, take criticism, and let others make decisions? What examples of communications from leadership and middle management tell the board about the commitment to values, openness, and accountability? What action does the board take against leaders or top performers who do not uphold the company's values? How are key promotions decided? Is management using root cause analysis where cultural issues are found, examining not just what went wrong, but why? How can the board use technology to analyse, interpret and present information? Does the board need to invest in human resources or internal audit, develop skills and capabilities, or encourage the use of multidisciplinary teams? How does the company deal with breaches of company rules or codes of conduct? Does internal audit have the degree of independence needed and a clear mandate to look at culture? How does the board address any negative trends or misalignment between values and behaviours? Have relevant members of the executive team been invited to explain the issues at the earlier stages, enabling all directors to share concerns or challenge assumptions well before the point of decision? Does the board have a clear idea of the success criteria related to particular decisions? What does the board do to test key decisions for alignment with values? What are the risks that a decision could encourage undesirable behaviours or send the wrong message? Is the board able to explain how the impact on key stakeholders has been taken into account? Relations with stakeholders. Can the board describe how stakeholders are prioritised and why? What are the key concerns of the workforce, the suppliers and the customers, and how is the board addressing them? Does the workforce consider that customers and suppliers are treated fairly and that the company cares about its impact on the environment and community? Has the board sought input from enough stakeholders to be comfortable that it has a rounded view? Has the board listened properly to the stakeholder voice? And what impact has it had on its decisions? Has the board considered how environmental and social issues might impact on the business, or linked its strategy to a recognised international framework? How well are the board's values and expected behaviours embedded in its human resources policies, procedures and practices? Is the board treating its people as a strategic asset? Has the board taken workforce views and priorities into account in developing its approach to investing in its people? Are behavioural objectives included in leadership and employee goals, and are behaviours formally assessed as part of performance review activity? What is the board doing to address gender pay gaps? Is the board doing enough to train and develop its people with the skills they will need in the future? Is there a forum for the workforce to share ideas and concerns? How does the board demonstrate it listens to the ideas and concerns from the workforce? Does management provide feedback on how complaints and concerns have been dealt with? How comfortable do our people say they are with challenging and reporting issues of concern? And is there any evidence that they are doing this? Do colleagues report that leaders and managers live the company's values? Do colleagues see the company's values being displayed in the way the business is run and decisions are made, as well as in leadership behaviour? Composition, succession and evaluation. Has the board assessed what skill set is required for the board and its committees? Does the board reassess the makeup of the board as a result of emerging trends? Does the board take account of the technical skills and knowledge required by the committees when recruiting members? How often is a skills audit undertaken, and is the board keeping up with the pace of change? Does the chair continue to demonstrate objective judgment and promote constructive challenge amongst other board members? Should length of service of the chair or an individual director be extended? And how does this fit with the wider succession planning and company objective? Does extending the length of service of the chair or an individual director complement diversity planning? Has the chair demonstrated effective engagement with major shareholders? Audit, risk and internal control. Are you satisfied that the company has adequate internal controls over risk? Is sufficient time allocated on the board agenda to enable a full discussion of the work of the audit committee? How has the board assessed whether the audit committee has a balance of skills and competencies necessary to fulfill its remit? How is the audit committee managing and monitoring the non-audit work the company's auditors deliver across the group? Are there clear procedures and triggers in place to elevate risks to the board quickly? Does the viability statement differentiate between the director's assessment of long-term prospects and their statement on the company's viability? Has the board considered previous statements that have been made, especially in raising capital, the nature of the business and its stage of development, and investment and planning periods? How has the board dealt with any relevant qualifications and assumptions when explaining the director's reasonable expectation of the viability of the company? Is the link between the viability statement and principal risks clear, particularly in relation to the scenario analyses? Are the stress and scenario analyses explained in sufficient detail to provide shareholders with an understanding of the nature of these scenarios and the extent of mitigating activities? Is the analysis underpinning the viability statement consistent with the board's statement on going concern? Are the prospects of the company set out in the viability statement consistent with any statements made on financial covenant and commitments given to pension fund trustees? Remuneration. How is executive remuneration aligned with company pay policy? How do workforce incentives support our culture and encourage the desired behaviours? What has the board done to explain to the workforce how executive pay arrangements align with wider company pay policy? How do the company's pay policies address pay gaps and pay ratios between the different quartiles of the workforce? What interaction has the board had with the nomination committee regarding the structure of the workforce and the company's plans for reducing its gender pay gap? How is the board innovating and updating its executive remuneration policy, for example, to strengthen the incentives for long-term thinking? How does executive remuneration link to the board's strategy and KPIs? How does the board's executive remuneration link to the board's strategy and KPIs? Has the board addressed the factors in provision 40 of the Code? Just a quote from the Code, Section 40 says the directors have a duty to promote the success of the company over the long term for the benefit of the shareholders as a whole, having regard to a range of other key stakeholders and interests. And this duty is set out in Section 172 of the Companies Act. Does the board need to interact with any other parts of the governance structure in respect of the risks arising from remuneration? How will any financial and non-financial performance measures support long-term thinking and delivery against strategy? Has the board considered how the choice of any particular measure may encourage negative behaviour, and what steps has it taken to manage such risks? Has the board consulted the audit committee on performance measures? What steps has the board taken to make sure that any performance measures are stretching? Can the board explain how it expects to exercise discretion over remuneration outcomes? Has the board made sure that there are no impediments to the exercise of discretion, for example in the contract terms of individual directors or in the scheme rules? Does the board understand the amount that is potentially being awarded, under what circumstances, and does it need a monetary limit? These questions can be found in the report Guidance on Board Effectiveness from the Financial Reporting Council. I do recommend that you obtain a copy, read it, mark it, learn it, and inwardly digest it. You can obtain a free copy from www.frc.org.uk.